So we thought it'd be a great idea to do something a little bit different, and we've got a panel of folks from a variety of perspectives here, and just kind of talking about, as you can see, talking about AI and how it can be used as a tool to help us with our workflows in the media space. So why don't we just start? We are not going to do 4 big bios. But I've asked each of our panelists, let's do like less than 30 seconds on who we are and who we represent. So I'll go ahead and start off, Chris Lennon with Ross Video, and I've really gotten into the AI thing recently personally, and our company has kind of dove right into this, like a lot of them, right? And so, yeah, honored to be joined by an esteemed group here. And so, Renard, why don't you lead off?
I'm Renard Jenkins. For those of you who weren't here earlier today, I'm president of SMPTE, as well as president of I2A2. We're a technology lab and an R&D company.
Anthony.
I'm Anthony. I don't think my mic is working. But I am the chair of the Toronto Audio Engineering Society. I'm a project lead at your Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I deal with automation and broadcast, as well as now becoming an enthusiast of artificial intelligence and synthetic media.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Suman, ML practitioner, also the chief AI officer of a product engineering company called NStarX. So we are AI and cloud first company, and we focus on AI solutions, real tangible AI solutions across multiple industry verticals.
Great. And does anybody else see the irony in the audio problems being with the AES guy up here?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm glad you all realize how important it is.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's all I take that as. It's not a slight.
Let's give the audio guys some respect.
It's important.
We took a video guide and fixed it for you.
Is it actually working? Is it actually working?
That's working.
Okay, great.
This is working?
Well, I'm a member of AES as well, so I don't know. Yeah.
Well, you were telling us earlier your
yes.
background is audio, right?
Yeah, I started out as a sound engineer. So.
All right, so hopefully you've all been enjoying the program so far, but we're gonna keep this fairly free flowing. I'd like to encourage. We've got a panel up here. We're gonna have a discussion, but we'd love it if you all would join in. So I'm not a big believer in like hold all your questions for 30 minutes and then dump them on us at the end. If you have questions or if you disagree or agree, disagree is better, by the way, with anything that I'm saying or any of the panelists are saying, throw your hands up. We can see you, and we would love to have you included in the panel in having a discussion just right away as soon as you think of anything. So please don't be shy. Just jump right in. So yeah, I think this has been a great program so far.
Oh, yeah.
Looking at AI from so many different perspectives, and I'll just kind of start out and I'll warn everybody. I don't know what direction this is all going to go in. So we're just gonna kind of see. But we've talked about large learning models, massive volumes of data, and obviously that needs to be dealt with. It doesn't just all come together on its own. Are there certain aspects of data infrastructure that we need to deal with when we're dealing with the kind of volumes of data that we need when we're doing AI applications? I'm looking at you, Suman. but
Yes. So I think there was an interesting conversation on LLMs, the speaker before this session as well.
Yeah.
I think I see LLMs as got a sort of a significant step in the evolution of AI. And definitely if you see the different phases of AI, if I were to look at the distinct phases, I think we had this classical machine learning era. And then we had the deep learning sort of era where we could ingest more information, have models that could potentially, with lesser amount of toil in terms of data engineering and feature engineering, you could build models. And I think the next disruption really turned out to be LLMs. Now I think LLMs, it's what it can do today. I think it's pretty impressive. It's a good start. It's a starting point of a new sort of evolution in AI. But I do see that moving forward, LLMs will evolve from this stage. They are very good at ingesting huge amounts of information. And I think as some of the speakers pointed out, terms like hallucination and imperfect or not exact responses are still a challenge. So for very precise problems where you need precise responses, they are a challenge to deal with. And even testing of large language models, unlike the classical machine learning models, it's a harder challenge, hard to test these models as well. But I think LLMs will evolve. Today's LLMs are fundamentally built on the technology of the transformer sort of architecture, which was really based on a 2017 paper, which was by a researcher in Google DeepMind. I think attention is all you need. If I remember, it was 2017. I think that really started it off. What's interesting to me is Google came up with this paper, but was monetized by OpenAI, really. So I think in this evolution, I think we'll see more getting added to LLM. I think some of those fundamental challenges, people do recognize that it takes a huge amount of compute, a large amount of data to really train these well. But I think these architectures are going to become more efficient. And as I see some of these research developments in the space, I think there are some candidates which can potentially replace the transformer architecture into more efficient architectures which are not GPU hungry, if you will. So I think we'll see more efficiency related to them in the future.
So when you're talking about, again, you get the large language models, and I'm going to apologize in advance. This whole AI area opens up a whole new can of alphabet soup, right? But I think Charles might have pointed out in his talk before that there's not a huge amount of understanding out there of regs and their application in AI. Does anybody want to try to clarify what a reg is and how it can be leveraged and what the best application of these is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we in our company we do build RAGs as a practical way of deploying some of these LLM models. So the challenge is today's lot of these LLM models are started out being sort of more generic models, but organizations have a large corpus of information. Now, different use cases, whether you want to use, let's say, an LLM in the specific context of a customer service situation, an example, or some other knowledge management inside your company. So you have a lot of corpus of documentation that's very specific and targeted. So the intent behind these RAGs is really how do you harness the power of these LLMs as a generation tool, but at the same time, can you apply a layer where it can be more precise in terms of vectorizing all your own corpus of information? And then how do you combine these? So kind of you almost create the illusion that you're sort of enhancing the LLM, if you will, to answer questions that are very specific to your own corpus of information to drive different use cases. So it's sort of an architecture which enables you to use your own information, store it in some sort of a vector databases, and then allow different users to access that information while giving you the illusion that LLM is actually doing all that for you. That's kind of very sort of the way I look at it.
At the CBC, when I first started using LLMs for whatever, the first thing I was told was don't put data into it. That was the rule I was given. 6 or 7 months later, it became put all your data into our localized LLM
Correct.
that we can use. And I think it's that proprietary information
Yes.
that we don't want to have escape the corporation.
And that is of huge, there, see, I told you it wasn't working.
Yeah, good idea.
There you go.
So I'm of the opinion that like a lot of the data models that are out there have been trained unethically. They are of stolen content or copyrighted content. So when it comes down to it, the mechanics have been trained, but they've been trained on unreliable data. And when it comes for us or for you as businesses, we've localized our own internal name is ChatCBC, and the whole idea is that it's to be kept relative to the group that's going to be using it, and that's where the value is. And where you can correlate these multiple pieces of data together, it does become a customer service type of thing. It does become, but it augments our maintenance's capabilities. We can take our human-written confluence and improve our services internally. So I think it's very important to realize that a lot of this data still is copyrighted, is infringed upon, is untrustable or trained on the public internet, is biased or trained in weird ways. But to eliminate some of that bias, even in our own writing, we have to be very careful about how we localize our conversations with these LLMs.
Yeah, and one of the things that's really important from an artist standpoint is having control over what it is that they're using and what it is that they're building. We find that building localized, smaller models, something that you can have on your computer, something that you can train only on your data, and you then have the option to choose if you want to share that out. But being able to do that on a localized way, in a localized way, has given some artists a little bit more of a sense of control.
Yes.
And a more sense of comfort, because they're doing it and they're not sharing it out with with anyone unless they so choose to. Now that limits what your model can actually do, and it will allow you to sort of do whatever that one thing you've trained it on. However, if that is useful for what your activity is, it works out pretty well. And when we look at RAGs, what we're looking at more so is treating them as gatekeepers. And that's what their purpose is for us, is we know that we're using some of the models that are public, we know that we have our own models that are private, but we also know what the answer is before we ask the question. And so that's what we actually use RAGs for, is confirmation that the model is operating properly in the way that we expect it to. That doesn't remove the ability for it to kind of veer off, but it gives us a sense of how accurate it is. And right now, with most of these models, if you can get in the range of 80 to 85%, you are really doing well. And so, the toddler becomes, a B to a high C to a low B student. That's what we are basing all of our research on right now.
To jump into that before that question, the toddler analogy is great, but there's always a parent there.
Oh, yes.
And what I've found with these LLMs and these models is that, they're under supervision, under training, they're tutors. And I don't ask one question and get a response and trust that response. I take that and I've been riffing with it.
Yeah.
And as as a parent, you lead, follow, iterate, lead, follow. And that type of, that circle of trying to solve the problem or trying to get to that 80% is not a one-shot deal that people assume it is.
No.
It's an iterative process of coaching, training, and riffing.
Yeah, I like to say that you're gonna you feed the baby, you train the baby.
Yes.
At some point, you're gonna have to change the baby. But it's all part of the process, and that's where the human and computer interaction is important.
Yeah.
That's where that is important, and that's why we have to make sure that throughout the process that we maintain the human interaction with these systems.
I think one of the, please.
Question.
One of the things that I've heard about RAGs is that after they've had a look at your private corpus of enterprise data, they'll give you an answer. Let me say it again. One of the things I've heard about RAGs is that after they've been trained on your proprietary corporate data, they'll give you the answer to your question, and they'll also provide you with a link showing what piece of data they used to generate that answer. Whereas if you're just asking GPT an answer, it won't give you any links to where it finds. Is that true across all RAGs? Is that just implementation dependent, the ones that I happen to have seen?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It's not going to give you the source of information unless it's implemented in a manner you can trace it back right to where that exact information is derived from in the documentation, right? So I think to your point, yes, some of these RAGs, there's no generic sort of an architecture, it's evolving. I won't say the final word on this is exactly the reference architecture for a RAG is. It's an evolving space, right? Let me give you an example of some of the things that we have done for our customers to solve problems like hallucination, for instance. How do you prevent information that's inaccurate or misleading sometimes? So we've also integrated some aspects, for example, things like knowledge maps. what we have found is adding a knowledge map to a RAG architecture where some of the information you can represent it into a sort of a graphical structure, and using the embeddings from some of those graphical structures, we are able to stop some of the hallucination, or at least reduce it to a large extent. So I think the RAGs, the sort of implementations will again depend on the sort of use cases you have as well. Because if you see the RAG architecture, eventually how do you use it? How do you consume it? Do you consume it like a chat application, or do you consume it like an offline sort of a summarization tool for some of your questions? Let me give a few more examples where we have used RAGs. There was a customer who was asking for an explainer for their legacy code. For example, let's take COBOL, right? Mainframe stuff. So they wanted to move over all of their COBOL stuff to a modern system. And they didn't have people who really knew all the code because it's been written for last 50 years.
People laugh.
So we built a RAG just to sort of explain what that code would do. And then we also use some very interesting concept called chain of thoughts, tree of thoughts, where you kind of, in your prompt engineering process, you want to really explore the space where you are trying to discover code. So I think the chain of thoughts really worked out very well, where we're able to really explain the code from different dimensions and use this as a code explainer for. That's just an example. But I've seen simpler ones where we have built a RAG purely for a chat application. And that's again a slightly different architecture. But so there is no, I would say, a sort of a generic architecture that works. Based on your specific use cases, you can implement one pretty quickly.
I would wonder, when do you have an application that you would not want to have, at least the option to have attribution of your sources?
Yes.
I mean, doesn't that sound like something that was mom and apple pie? It's like, I would always want that. Or is it just because of the overhead that maybe in some cases you would not implement that? I mean, it just.
Yes.
Okay.
I think some cases it's important to know where the source is. There are other use cases it might not be that important. So you try to exactly design a RAG for your problem that you're dealing with.
Yeah,
But attribution is a great feature to have.
Oh yeah, when you think
Yeah.
about legal and what
Yeah.
attorneys have to go through, the ability to have attributions to what they're actually writing is important. So what we're seeing now is that a lot of attorney and legal organizations, they want to keep all of their massive libraries internal. They never wanted to actually touch anything outside. So that's where the model comes in to really work. And that's when you can really dive in. And you look at it as a feature. Attribution is just a feature of the RAG. So whatever model you're building, you put that in as one of the main features.
Yeah, I think other option also, I think Renard, you hit that point about these smaller models that are more localized.
Yeah.
I think that's a great option for some use cases where the corpus of information is not too large.
Mm-hmm.
A smaller model can work in those situations. I think you could make these work. But as the complexity increases, what we have found is GPT is like more than like 200 billion parameter kind of model. Some of these smaller models are like 7 billion parameters, 10 billion parameters. So there's a huge world of difference between these two. That's the sort of response you get from each one of these. So a smaller problem, if you wanted to try a localized approach, you can take a smaller footprint model, even sort of retrain it and work on the core model itself as an approach, as an alternative to RAG, if you will. But I think you are constrained by your resources, your investment into how much you want to put into your hardware and infrastructure, because to really build something even like remotely anywhere close to the scale of GPT, it costs a lot of money
Oh, yes,
to
it
build those
does.
models.
I mean, we're going back to sort of old school hardware costs.
Yeah.
Where you're looking at a rack-based server that's going to be anywhere between $60,000 and $80,000 per server. So if you and you're not going to need just one. So that's where the data centers do come into play, and having the infrastructure and being able to pay for it on an hourly basis. But then you get into the security aspects and how people feel about that. So yeah, it's hardware has not died yet, people. So.
Yeah, yeah. it
One thing
hasn't.
I'm extremely worried about in some of the references is link rot, and that the internet is kind of like consuming itself, and like there's no incentive to publish things with proper resources. the AES just changed their entire website, so every link that existed previously is now rotted. So as the internet is constantly changing and never being updated, a lot of information that may have existed 5 years ago is no longer accessible at that source. So when it comes to like journalistic integrity and all of maintaining that chain of references, I'm really worried about that some of these models that have been previously trained lose that connection and to that lineage of content and where it was created, how it was created, and
So
where it belongs.
I'm surprised to hear that. It is not part of their business model to refresh these models periodically, just knowing the nature of the internet?
Well, I think it's kind of one of those like speed versus accessibility, and I think like GPT, it wasn't connected to the internet. It wasn't a living thing. It was a frozen in time snapshot of
Correct.
the world.
Yeah.
So it will be part of moving forward, but I think that is something that's the service. That's where the money is in the freshness of
In
the
like
data.
a refresh cycle
Yeah.
that goes along. Is that a new business that will probably pop up? Or?
Well, I hope something like Wikipedia uses something like a model to validate all of those links, because if these LLMs are trained on something like community curated encyclopedic information like that those links stay fresh and active and alive. But I've been to Wikipedia articles where the link has been gone for 10 years, and there's only who's the one person in the world who's doing the Wayback Machine. Like there's only one or two efforts in preserving snapshots of the internet. So I think there's kind of like a win-win situation if we concentrate on keeping these things fresh, but there's also value in keeping a lineage of where they went wrong and at what point in time they died.
Yeah, I think that also leads you to the point about curation of data as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can imagine the complexity of curation when you're picking up stuff from the internet. How do you curate that information before you actually train it as well? And transformers do have this issue of a context length or a context window, which is kind of limited, so it kind of finds it hard to connect all the dots.
Yeah.
So I think those architectures, I believe, will evolve. They will solve some of these fundamental issues with transformers, but the current architecture, these are some of the limitations of, yeah.
One thing that kind of concerns me is, well, you spin one up, I spin one up, he spins one up, everybody's spinning one up.
Yeah.
I hate that word because it's just, but you think of the sustainability of something like that, and how many GPUs are you running to serve you and to serve you and to serve me, and everybody's trying their own private experiment. So it will have huge environmental impacts that we have not really seen yet or talked about. That's one of the ethical concerns that concerns us, as public broadcasters. How do we justify, these islands of the same thing over and over and again, just to maintain that privacy of our data?
Information.
It could even all be multiple islands within one large organization, right?
Yes.
It would be
Yeah,
incredibly
definitely.
inefficient. And one thing some of you probably heard me say before is like, I wonder, at some point, are we going to have more people with Suman's title of Chief AI Officer who, in a large organization, hopefully you have somebody who's overseeing this across all these silos and saying, hey, this is nuts that you guys are each standing these things up.
Yeah.
This is not sustainable or green or in any way. It's not efficient from a business perspective. Is that something? Are we going to see an evolution of more chief AI officers or whatever you want to call them in large organizations? You think?
You're already seeing you're seeing that already.
Yep.
People are starting to adopt the title, starting to put those into place. But there's good news in the sense that there is work that's being done. There's a paper out of MIT on spike form, and there's work that's being done right now to take a look at how you can look at this from a sustainability standpoint, and how using their proposed model, it actually decreases the GPU usage without decreasing the performance. The paper, it's been out, I think maybe 3 or 4 months now, so it hasn't gotten a lot of traction yet, but it'll be interesting to see where that goes, and then to see how many other people are getting involved in that particular part of the business.
I think the sustainability itself is just a huge chunk of the business
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
I'm not a prompt engineer. I'm an engineer who prompts.
Yeah.
So, I don't think we're going to adopt those titles anytime soon. But I do think it should be something that we can all learn as individuals to get better at. Your point about being an English major and being able to, talk to the computer in the right way
Yeah.
is a beautiful thing. Like the first time you get into it, you're like, this is, to me, it was like a spiritual experience to have a cohort that was, like a mentor who didn't dress me down. So when it comes to the sustainability side of things, I think we're going to have to take a real holistic view of just like how much this stuff is consuming. Like I look at all those, like I see 9 or 10 fans spinning on computers over there that are not being used.
Yeah.
Whether those GPUs are doing stuff or not, it's irrelevant. It's a very scary thing when it comes down to it.
Yeah.
And it's not just hidden in a data center. Yeah. There's a question at the back.
We get a mic over here?
See, audio, it is important.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So my question is about the data classification. Is there any ML model that, for example, the audience? So imagine in a corporation, we're going to be trained a model, but I don't want to see this group see this information, and I see another group see that. And if I allow me, I'm going to second question is about this. We talking about cybersecurity a lot, but we never heard about AI cybersecurity. That foreign company or anyone that has that type of the money, they're going to train the model with the untruth data, which ORCID is going to use that. So if there any movement or anything happening on that side, you could advance. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you to turn around. There's a young man sitting right behind you. If you want to talk about cyber, he gave a wonderful presentation this morning in looking at how to think about diffusion and backdoors, and what's being done in that space. And he's doing some great research at the University of Ottawa. But I will say that there is a lot of movement right now in the industry with regard to AI security. People they're interested in it, but it's not the fun and exciting sort of thing. So you're not hearing as much about it on a daily basis. But there is a lot of concern. Dr. Poynton, he spoke about all the different breaches just right before lunch that have happened. That is driving, I live in the DC area, so I may get a little bit more of the insight. There is a lot of governmental concern in the US around security for all these models. So there is work being done. I know that there's work being done at MIT, there's work being done at University of Texas, and also there's work being done in the UK that I'm aware of.
Thank you. And about the data classification, if any model.
So for us in our local environment, we create piles, and again, you can correlate the two piles of data together. But I think it comes down to classification and how you want to train it, who uploads it, what department uploads it. It's in its infancy.
Yeah.
And in terms of adoption, like I say, 6 or 8 months ago, don't put data in it, Anthony. And now it's like, put everything into it. So, attitudes are changing because the value of the efficiencies are there. And I think containment in how you contain things is very important. Again, that's a human classification and human labeling. And as we are able to, cross-reference these data piles to other data piles, we're just building, a warehouse for our own stuff. And what shelf you put it on is departmental based. So, and I think GPT and they're doing the same thing where you can create your own, source of knowledge. Here's your other source of knowledge. Compare these sources of knowledge. Use only this source of knowledge. Use only this source of knowledge. And ask and probe questions relative to it. So, but again, adoption of it and getting into it, people could poison it to all the points.
Yes.
People have already started to poison it.
Yes.
The talk I gave yesterday was a group of people who have generated every melody possible. Well, that's data poisoning. There, as many ethical players there's a good 10% of them who are unethical, who just want to see it burn. And I think those types of things will creep their ugly heads really soon on a lot of things.
Yeah,
Great question.
yeah, awesome.
Sure. Good discussion here. The whole industry's into mergers and acquisitions and consolidation. And you even take a look at station groups. When they bought more stations, they merge all their news archives. So what happens, to your point, Anthony, I'm going to start calling you 404.
Okay.
And anyway, to your point, now all of a sudden can you merge LLMs? How does that work? And then when you divest from some area, how do you separate that
Probably the tougher
LLM?
one, right?
Yeah, the tougher one is going to be the separation, but can you merge them? Yes. You just retrain the model, and you just add in. You would have to retrain the entire model, and you would add in, yeah. No. You are merging because you're bringing in the data from one LLM, and you're bringing it to the other, and you're retraining it on both. So now it's a combined, large language model. The separation portion of it is just like old archiving. You got to think about it. Some way I've got to tag these two separate models and make sure that that is a part of the data that's going in. That way I could separate it back out. I don't know anybody who's doing that right now, but logically that's how I would approach it if I had that. Yeah, and that's where, to be honest, that's where AI, really that's where machine learning
Yes.
can
Dominates.
really come in and totally dominate, because that's how you'd be able to pull this thing apart.
But I think a lot of that classification comes down to how we create data. So local news, well, it's created in Saskatoon. It's localized there. It's tagged there. It gets that tag. Some of my colleagues and I were hypothesizing, well, in 30 years, will our archive just be vertical video with TikTok clips with open captioning on it? So I don't know what the archive of the future looks like, Stan. Like it's if we are here to serve Canadians local news, the mergers and acquisitions don't help. They homogenize regions, provinces, and Canada is so diverse that I think it's very important that local news gets created and local news gets captured. And I do think these tools can really help us, write stories, but there's still value in capturing the localized content and information, and how we present it and how we contain it. When we publish it, we'll be able to separate it in the future because of how it was initially published.
Right.
So-
And when it comes to what you were saying, Anthony, the regionality of things is necessary, but also we have to understand that live cannot be replicated because it didn't happen yet. So when you start thinking about a lot of what we're doing here, these tools will be great for productions and sort of scripted and those types of things, but they have to find their place with how they're going to work in the journalism world, how they're going to work in live world. That's, if you're talking print journalism, that's a separate thing. But if you're talking live television journalism, how is this going to help other than research right now? And then on the back end, when you start to look at archiving, because it cannot create something that hasn't happened yet.
Well, to that point, the TV, print is a byproduct of what people say and think. So, we can use these types of machine learning to generate print content from radio shows.
Yeah.
Transcriptions are much more metadata rich. Our archive is dead files on a server if we don't have the metadata associated with it. And there's a binder at the CBC that is like the death binder. So when somebody dies, they open the page and they go, okay, here's where you get all that content from.
Yeah.
And that type of metadata was hand curated and bespokely made. But now it's like, find me these things and there it is, or find me mentions of this person talking about this person. And those, like, the one thing people skip about the internet is the most powerful thing are the hyperlinks between the things.
Yeah.
And what AI can really help us do as content creators and content curators and archivists is augment the hyperlinks between these things. And to me, that's where the real value is in terms of production, news gathering, and archival services.
You gave me a flashback. I used to be like the obituary guy. Every time somebody died, I had to edit their obits.
Yeah,
man.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, the Queen's obit. That was,
Oh,
you
my
know, like
jeez.
that was an event.
Dude, I go all the way back to the original shuttle explosion,
There you go.
all the way through Princess Diana. Everybody who passed away at any time during that time period, I was doing their obituaries.
Yeah. Imagine
That
how
was
much
crazy.
easier it would be now.
Oh, it'd be totally easy now. You know, I just say, hey, pull up all this footage and throw it on a timeline for me.
And,
That's right.
Yeah, I'll have to politely disagree with the assertion that the live stuff it's challenging, but it's not impossible to apply AI to
No,
live
no.
production either.
I will. Let's have a fight right now.
All right.
No,
Wait, you're
I
bigger than me.
no. I don't disagree with that. I think that it is definitely possible for us to include, AI in any process that we so choose to. However, what is its relevance and what is the amount of power and the amount of influence and the amount of impact that it will have will be on the scripted side much bigger than it will be right now on the live side. Now, if we think about live sports, if I've got an AI assist that can pull up the statistics
Yes.
of what the Toronto Raptors did in the last year, why haven't they gotten to the NBA Finals, or why haven't they had a great season since Vince Carter was here? Yes, I'm a Vince Carter fan, and yes, I'm throwing shade at Canada right now. But if I had something like that would actually spin that up and I'm ready to go, and then we added with what Bo came up with his piece of saying, okay, I'm now calling out the TD portion of this. As soon as I call out, like, hey, cut to, the Toronto Raptors and so forth, and player X does whatever, then a graphic automatically comes up.
Yep.
There are ways for us to integrate it in.
Yep.
But the impact of saying, hey, I need something that's going to actually create a development document, create a pitch deck, create a storyboard. All of these things are possible right now.
Yep.
Now I'm going to have something that does text to video. And then I'm going to have something that says, okay, now I'm going to put in interstitials within all of that, and I'm going to have it create, sort of transitions from one thing to another. All of those things are possible for us to do right now. People haven't focused on live as much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But they're
Well-
not necessarily very accurate, some of these yet.
oh no, they're way
Because
off.
I tried some of these things. For example, you talked about pitch deck.
Yeah.
So I often use it in generating, I'm kind of lazy to make pictures. All these engineering pictures of boxes connecting with tons of arrows going back and forth. It kind of looks simple if you draw it yourself, but if you try to use a tool, say, hey, draw a picture like this, it struggles.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things so
Yeah.
that Ross video, we kind of got the direction from David Ross of, if you're not using AI in your job right now, you need to be. And I'm like, oh, part of my job is making decks, to do
Yeah.
these speaking opportunities. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I'm not there yet. I've tried, and I'll keep trying, but the promise is beyond the reality.
Yeah,
in a lot
right
of
now.
cases.
You didn't train it on your thousands of decks you've done.
Maybe I need to do that. Yeah. Yes, question.
Can we just stay with live for a second?
Yeah.
Almost all of the discussion has been about AI as a path to product. So let's go back a minute, because many of us are engaged deeply in the process of creating live production. And there's only so much you can learn by observing the product. Let's leave the consequence of sports editorial out, because it's really obvious how you can make that march, with or without third-party data.
Yeah.
But so much of the complexity, anyone in this room who's ever worked on a giant multi-camera show, once the crew gets over north of 100,
Yeah.
right? In a big production environment, so this is true of any broadcast center too, so much of the complexity is not apparent if you just look at the product or the input sources. That maybe there isn't a script. It's not
Yeah,
scripted.
yeah.
There's a bunch of rules. Yes, it's a hockey game, it's a football game, it's a rock concert. But all of the technical complexity is completely invisible. And as an industry, we have a horrific track record at not documenting things. So there's nothing to train a model on to teach AIs what it is that the humans who are left need in order to be able to do their jobs. If you just trained a machine, a model of some kind, to create football games, it might be fairly horrific.
Yeah.
So does someone want to talk about how do we imagine in the future training on those ineffable portions of our craft that there's no evidence to train them on?
Yeah.
I'll speak to that a little bit. You know, like as we have cameras that become networked, they can display so much metadata about it. You know, I look at Peter tilting his camera, turning his camera. There's polar coordinates, GPS locations of camera. There's metadata that we throw away more metadata than we curate.
Yes, we do.
Sadly,
Yes,
right?
we do.
That's a problem that
Yeah.
we've got. Right?
It is a problem. Well, but the problem is that it's like unusable because it's over there and there's an SDI cable coming out of it and that's where it ends.
Yeah.
There's no tally lights here. You know, that's a luxury item. So would that have made a better piece of content if I look over at that camera? And so then on top of things, you know, your Dan Dugans, your speech recognition, I'm talking right now, that camera moves towards me. But that metadata is so difficult to tie between manufacturers and vendors.
Yeah.
So because it's so difficult, it's not discoverable, it's not usable, it's
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, that's exactly where SMPTE comes in.
well, it is, but at the same time, you know, the one thing I've learned about standards is nobody reads them all, and everybody wants to reinvent their own standard. So there's a fear of not invented here syndrome that exists between manufacturers, and some manufacturers, not to knock SMPTE standards, but they will filibuster for profit. Every standard is a business model. So if you don't agree with that standard, you're not going to pursue that business model. So I think it's the standards of standards needs to happen, and that's a really risky thing because everybody wants to have a unique product that only does the thing that they want instead of it being a product that fits into the ecosystem. What was the
I think that's a failure within our business. Okay, we all know that everybody's doing the same thing, but they're all doing it different for whatever reason. However, interoperability only works with standards.
Yeah.
And you can have your secret sauce, but if you're going to have your secret sauce, you're going to play by yourself.
Yeah.
And that limits your customer pool, that limits your ability to expand and to scale. So it is, you know, a lot of us, you know, we're looking at this from the SDO level at a greater scale on how do we actually serve our customers a little bit better, get them to buy into what it is that we're selling, and I think that is important. I would like to also, you know, address one of the other things that you mentioned was you talked about the amount of data, you know, and Anthony mentioned it as well. One of the things that I think is actually working to our advantage right now is that people are leaning into things like virtual production, which requires all of that data
Just to
to
work.
actually,
Just to work.
just to work. So it requires that all of that's captured now. So we at least have access to it, and we're not throwing it on the floor like we used to.
Yeah.
If you were in the film production space, one of the jobs that became a real thing was data wrangler. Okay, and the data wrangler became a real thing. However, the amount of people who were the group of people that were getting the jobs of data wrangler was usually the least experienced person on the set. And they were also the person that was left at the end to say, okay, now you got to collect all this stuff, put it on a secure drive, and then deliver that. Those drives then go and sit on the shelf. They don't go anywhere, and that data just sits there. However, you don't know how clean or how well it's collected because the individual who's doing it is usually, like I said, the least experienced person. So we do ourselves a disservice when we don't take advantage of all of the data that is around us. Zeiss lenses right now are starting to collect a ton of their data and feeding that back into the files. I suggest that all lens companies start to look at that model and do it. Another thing is I want to give a shout out to NBC. And I say this because you talked about, you know, the lack of documentation. I will say that the NBC sports team, for the last 20-some years, they've done, really it's even more than 20 years, they've done the Olympics. If you have ever had the opportunity to talk with Darrell Jefferson and have him walk you through what they do for like the opening ceremony, it is just incredibly documented. So that's one of those things that we could use for a model. And the documents are, I mean, when I talk about detail, everything you can think of is in those documents and in those diagrams. From, you know, from camera 1 to camera 1000, from the location where it's supposed to be at the opening ceremony to where it eventually ends up. They have all that stuff there. That's the type of stuff that could be valuable to us. And I do know that, you know, I know CBC has that, because when I was at PBS, we worked very closely with the CBC. And they have documentation just like we had documentation. It's not as good, I'll be honest, for us. You know, we haven't done the best job, but it's time for us to realize that data is the currency by which we will survive going forward.
So
I'm going to have to kind of pull a Mark Shubin here and say we're going to make that the last word. Our time has expired, unfortunately. I think we could do this
Yeah.
for the whole afternoon.
Well,
no kidding.
But
We'll finish this conversation.
yes, we're happy to finish this in the breaks.
Yeah, I think just a quick, I don't think the media industry in this regard, Renard, should beat themselves up, because I can't think of an industry which has done a brilliant job of, let's say, either the data management practices or having adequate documentation. I think all of them are struggling with it to varying degrees, right? Nobody has kind of conclusively
Don't
solved
feel
the
alone.
problem. I mean, you know, there is this universal quest for, okay, I need a universal semantic layer where I can discover everything. I mean, that's like a dream, an illusion, but it's not happened so far.
All right. Hopefully this was entertaining, maybe a little bit educational, and thanks for staying awake after lunch.
Dude, it's good.